Rooz. I work at Gradle, and we do build tooling and whatnot, and heavy in the developer productivity space. So obviously, we're curious about what the community is doing around mobile developer productivity. And we have some great folks here to share some of their findings and wins and challenges with all of you. And hopefully you have some nice takeaway and little fun interactive panel session till then. Would I introduce our amazing panelists here? Jesse Wilson, one of the most talented engineers, as one of my best friends used to say at Cash App. He's in Chet Haas's Android's book, one of the early Android team members, and now he works at Cash App. We have Ishan. Recently met Ishan. He works at TikTok. They have a massive app. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Super popular. Lots of complexity, huge scale, very interesting challenges to share with the community. Ty Smith, my old buddy, we run San Francisco Android GDG together. We've known each other for years. I've done this panel before. He's speaking at our Develop Productivity Summit with me next week. And he works at Uber, dev platform team, a lot of interesting challenges and massive scale, monorepos, all the good stuff. Eve, I just met Eve recently. She works at Meta. She's one of the folks responsible for doing the conversion of the Java code to Kotlin and all the challenges there. We had some really interesting conversations last night and looking forward to kind of getting into it. Okay, so let's jump in. Jesse, you're up first. Tell us a bit about Cash App, tool and tech stack, any build and test metrics, and how your developer productivity org is organized. And we'll start with you.
Okay, so we're like your we're like your sample Android Gradle project, just enormous. And we've been enjoying the fact that just staying on mostly things for a long time has made things just get faster and faster and faster. We've had to be pretty disciplined. We things like configuration cache. We have to adopt things to make it so that our builds are pretty strict. But we're in hundreds of modules, and our builds are fast, and it's just a absolutely wonderful environment to write code in a way that it was less wonderful a year ago, much less wonderful 2 years ago. It's just like, and we're riding that wave. We're riding that wave.
For us at TikTok, I think pretty similar in that sense. We have about 5 million lines of code. In terms of modules, we're about close to 1,000 modules. We actually recently moved to monorepo setup in the last, I think, 2 years or so. Builds are around 6,000 builds a day, spread across time zones by about 600-ish developers just working on the project. And then we try to build as much on the cloud, but I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. Try not to build anything locally because nobody wants to wait. It's much faster to do it there. Gradle's our choice of build system as well, but a lot of customizations that we do on top of Gradle, also to the Kotlin compiler. People, like when they see a problem, they run with it. I think it's a rare place where you actually get buy-in from leadership on doing all those optimizations. I've never been able to get a lot of that buy-in at previous companies. So that's what our scale looks like.
There we go. At Uber, we are less of your standard Android developer environment. We've had a lot of scaling challenges with Gradle and some of those environments. And so we're a Bazel stack. We've been deep in a migration from Buck, which we were on before, to Bazel. So we're still a little bit hybrid, but we've moved all our local developers onto Bazel at this point. We deal with quite a bit of scale. Our Android repo is over 10 million lines of code. We do a lot of code generation, so I think everything that's outputted is going to be triple or quadruple that amount of code. On the number of modules, somewhere in the 10 to 20,000 module range. Pretty large. If you were measuring by Bazel actions, where you generating a lot, I think it's going to be hundreds of thousands of actions. We have about 300 to 400 monthly active Android contributors. So if you were to scale that up by uniques over 6 months, I think it's 500 to 600. but a lot of folks are polyglots and they're working across repos, so it's kind of hard to actually name the amount of Android engineers specifically. So out of those folks, we have many thousands of builds a day, and I think the output of that is a couple hundred commits a day typically. Our developer platform org is about 300 people, and that's spread across US, India, Amsterdam, and a bunch of remote folks. And then we support all of the tech stacks at Uber. We have 6 monorepos, platform-oriented monorepos, and that's about 6,000 engineers or so around the world that we're supporting.
So at Meta, everything is custom pretty much, except for the language, and to some extent the IDE. The build system is Buck 2 now. We are using a custom version of version control as well called Sapling. Basically anything that we could not take off the shelf. If there's a wheel that we could reinvent, we have reinvented it. There are probably dozens of IDE plugins for Android Studio and in IntelliJ. And I guess the reason that this has happened is because we have like tens of millions of lines of code for Android alone, and thousands of developers committing every day. I assume thousands of builds. I've never even thought to check daily. I think I probably account for a fair few of those because I am constantly spawning instances of things that I shouldn't be. But this all is supported by actually, I would say like 2 orgs. We've got one DevX org, which is right around 1,000 people. And granted, they support, all the platforms, not just mobile. And then I'm actually not in that org. I'm in a separate org called Mobile Foundation, which is sort of adjacent. And it includes people who do things like SDK upgrades, also folks working on some libraries that are, some of which are open source like Litho, React, and then a lot of people who do a lot of code mods, because I guess part of working on these kind of large frameworks is that you also have to deal with all of the corner cases because you're dealing with every corner of the app. And so we often end up collaborating as well with the DevX folks because we are the people hitting the most extreme case where we actually need to build Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Messenger multiple times every day. And that is just not a use case that is within the norm. So we work with them.
There you have it, folks. To ship software at scale, like these amazing organizations with products that we use all the time, you need this dedication and investment in developer productivity and developer experience. And it's no secret. And thanks for sharing what you all do to keep that scale kind of going. So that was a nice icebreaker to kind of get things going. Let's give some subs to help with the folks with the community here. What was the biggest thing that you all noticed in the last 24 months that had the largest impact on developer productivity, developer experience? Jesse, you want to go first?
Configuration cache. Configuration cache. It's the best thing ever. It means that every time I run Gradle, it's a hot, ready-to-go system. And it's just worked wonderfully for us. I think it cuts like a minute off the launch time for our Gradle builds. And when our Gradle builds are like 10 seconds, it's just night and day. So it has been pretty sensitive. You make like a small plugin change and you get off the configuration cache happy path and it breaks everything. But we've been pretty strict about that. That and the remote cache, it's just wonderful. And I think that of the group of us, we're the smallest, it seems, and it's like, do not add more people to your team. All these people have horrible, complicated, bad builds, but we still have the happy path, yo.
For us, I think the biggest impact came from coming into the monorepo setup because we invest heavily into modularization and we are big proponents of that. Not scared of increasing the number of modules, just keep building that tree, but like make sure you flatten it, the graph as you're going along. In terms of the developer productivity from the feature side, like how are we enabling developers to build things faster? I think we've invested a lot into building internal SDKs and like dev suits or whatever you want to call that, just so that you can lift off all the boilerplate somebody needs to get done in order to set up a new experiment on the UI or any other layer. So I think those are the two areas we majorly have invested in and seen big improvements at TikTok.
For us, I think it's an aggregate of a lot of things that we continually see, like bringing up the productivity, but a couple that I'll highlight. One maybe more for the product engineers, which we're mostly supporting in our company, has been all the investments in Gen AI. We've made a really large investment as a company. We have a central AI DevX teams purview, and we're doing things like automatic test generation in IDE code assistance, using AI to help migrate our legacy Java code to Kotlin code. And across all of that, we're seeing this big lift, and we're seeing a bunch of metrics from our developers that show that there's a huge quantifiable lift. Over 10% of like diff throughput up per month, a huge amount of reported productivity gains. So I think that's one big one. And then the other one, for platform engineers, we've made a pretty big investment into our remote dev environment, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about later. But one really powerful thing for that is, as platform engineers working in these big monorepos, like you talked about having to build all these apps, it becomes really important to have a lot of surface areas where you can quickly do a lot of big builds and parallelize work and kick off different workflows and migrations, and being able to just quickly provision a machine that's ready to go with our entire repo, and start to do work, do an upgrade, do a migration, do a clean build, and do several of those in parallel, has really enabled a lot of our platform engineers to accelerate their productivity when they'd otherwise be stuck, waiting for 30 minutes or an hour for a single clean build to be done.
Yeah, I don't have much to add here. I mean, Buck 2 is a huge improvement over Buck 1, much faster builds, much faster tests, which has actually resulted in people writing tests, which is a nice change. And I think Gen AI as well has helped people feel more comfortable trying languages that they're not as familiar with, because they don't feel quite as much friction having to look everything up all the time. Also, it's great for documentation. Now we actually have, documentation too on things that previously did not.
Great. And thanks for sharing all that. Similar question as far as favorite IDE plugins, any tooling that helped you along the way, any bonus points for anything that's free that folks could use out there that they don't have to buy would be great. Might be harder for meta stuff because you're custom, but whatever you have in there. And Jesse, I know you shared some of that earlier, but what else do you have?
So we created Paparazzi several years ago. J-Rod's in the room, the person who really made it happen. And our code base went from having like a bunch of relatively fragile espresso tests to having just tons and tons of screenshot tests. And it's just been wonderful because you can refactor your code with, aggressively change how the business logic computes its result and be confident that you're not going to like wreck the presentation tier. So I'm more confident than I've ever been in our application's ability to be correct under an aggressive amount of refactoring and changes, because our test suite is at that really sweet spot in terms of it's really stable, and it's also it's stable. We don't have the flaky espresso problems. It's also fast. And so the tool I would recommend everybody go and start working on immediately is Paparazzi. I'm just really proud of the work our team's done on that. And I'd say that like that's my productivity tool.
For us, I think three things come to mind. Because I'm also especially new on that team, whenever I would see problems or I had to debug or learn like how this thing works, I think there's a IDE plugin that it's called Wrangler. Think of that like layout inspector, but on steroids. So you get access to the UI that you're looking at, and then any element that you see, you can interact with it in like so many ways. Just like looking at the UI, like what is it doing, how is it laid out and things like that. But it goes a step further. You can actually make edits to that thing, and In the old days, if you remember like hot reloads or like there used to be something called JRebel, it's much faster than that. Has limited capabilities, but I think it allows you to do so much more. The other thing that I remember is Remote X. It's basically a way to build things on the cloud and then pull those changes. But it's smart enough to like kind of do the diffing on the client side and only pull those changes up there, build the APK, pull it down, and then install it on the device so that you're not like kind of limited by what kind of an M1, M2, M3 you're running. Everybody's running that on the infrastructure. And the third thing is we have a plugin to kind of improve the syncing process in the IDE itself, where we kind of do something what Focus does, for example, of only bringing in certain modules into your project with Gradle that you're actually caring about, rather than pulling in all those 1,000 modules and then letting Studio or IntelliJ index all of those. I think those three really help us. Unfortunately, none of that is available publicly, but
You should have started with that.
yeah, it should be an inspiration if you guys wanted to build something.
You have
like
to
that.
come work at TikTok, you know.
We're hiring.
Yeah.
For us, first all +1 snapshot testing. That's been a big for us. We are not using Paparazzi. We're using Roborazzi, which is built on top of RoboElectric. But similarly, it's been a really strong productivity investment for us and a quality investment as well. I will also say a lot of the cool stuff that's mentioned in Gradle, like with configuration cache, we kind of get out of the box with Bazel. So like that's pretty good for us. But one thing we didn't get was the IDE preview for Compose. That comes for free with Gradle, and you might take that for for advantage. But for us, our developers didn't have that, and so the iteration cycle for their inner loop could be much longer if they're working on UI, where they have to build the full app, launch the app, go and verify. And we recently did some work to support Android Studio and Bazel together for Jetpack Compose Preview, and that's a real big boost for our developers.
I guess Llama is like the obvious choice. I hear it's free and people seem to like it. That is what's powering our Gen AI that we're using for, writing code and in some cases doing end-to-end testing as well. I feel like I got to give a plug for the Java to Kotlin conversion tooling. I mean, it's already built into IntelliJ, and actually this is how Ty and I know one another from working on this with other companies who are all trying to pool our resources to open source some of the contributions we're making both to IntelliJ directly and then also additional plugins on top to handle a lot of the more Android specific use cases or things that are like a little too aggressive to be put directly into the IDE itself. But being able to automate pretty much end to end a massive migration like this has just made it possible. Otherwise, what would you do with 10 million lines of code? You would just keep it.
And I gotta plug a couple of stuff that our team is working on. Of course, the Gradle build scan plugin, it's free service, nice UI, share and collaborate, troubleshoot, view your dependencies. I don't know if Nelson is here. He built the Gradle cache fix plugin. There he is. Very helpful, and so give those a try. Next topic, to continue investment in developer productivity, obviously you need a team around it. You need to prioritize certain initiatives and whatnot. So you have to kind of measure it and quantify it. How do you all measure it? And of course, everyone's aware of the current climate, right? Not everyone has the headcount and the resources and the budgets to get this stuff happening. So how do you all so two questions. How do you measure it, Jesse? And how do you sell it up? And what are you doing in this climate with, all these restrictions and whatnot?
So for measurement, we're taking our Gradle build times, and that's like stuff like IntelliJ Sync and also builds. We dump it into some databases that go through Snowflake and then this thing called Looker, and eventually we get this dashboard that tells us this is how long builds are taking, this is how many builds that we're doing. And this totally amazing thing happened where we took those measurements and we said, hey, look, we can make people's builds 25% faster by buying brand new Macs, because we've got these Macs that came out with the first Apple Silicon ones. We upgraded the entire fleet of Android developers from M1s to M3s and got a 25% boost in local builds. And again, we're the unique group amongst this group of superscalers because we're still in the place where we can do local builds and it's very productive for us. So, but like this is not a big developer analytics team. We just have some scrappy people who scraped some metrics from one place, put them into another place, built some graphs, and then said, yo, Jack Dorsey, give us new Macs, and the check was written.
In terms of, I think, productivity, it's very similar to this setup. We also use kind of build scan plugin to report metrics and then collect them, plot graphs, but also a lot around, I think, static analysis and lit and stuff. So for us, those metrics also matter a lot. And we try to make sure that teams are not just shipping things, but like also improving the code health overall, which kind of impacts the developer productivity and satisfaction in the long run. So that is something we also actively track. But yes, like the build time, the average build time, or how often people are building and how long it's taking for us to like pull those changes and then displaying those iterations on emulator or the device. I think that's a key metric for the mobile engineering infra team, which we try to track.
For us, we have a mix of qualitative and quantitative metrics that we're tracking both at the high level and at the very granular level. Plus one to rolling out local analytics for your developers. We provision a local analytics client to all developer laptops, as well as CI, our remote cloud environments. This is usually integrated in the IDE, in the build, in any tooling that we use, so we can have a really robust set of granular metrics, and then we can use those for things like justifying new laptops as well. But then we can roll those up, and we can start to see developer funnels, so we can see like common like IDE paths that people are taking and where attrition happens. And we've seen this for like onboarding to different plugins in the IDEs. And you could roll that up higher, and you can see throughput on like PRs, code review times, a bunch of other interesting ones that start to bubble up. And then on the qualitative side, we think that's really important to kind of pair the two. We do a biannual developer survey where we collect, their self-reported information on how productive they're feeling, as well as a bunch of granular feedback. And then we're starting recently to do experience sampling surveys where we can recognize specific actions via an API and then send them out a micro survey to answer in real time. And we can randomize that and get statistically significant data. So we kind of take a mix of all of those and helps us prioritize what to work on and how that's represented to our leadership.
I think our setup is pretty similar to Uber's. I will say there are a couple differences. One is that, well, maybe you guys are doing this too. So the new hotness right now at Meta is to something called EYS, or engineering years saved, and that is the language that all of the senior people speak. And it doesn't matter that it's very hard to calculate that number. That is what they want. So we try. And like the number can be quite synthetic since you're doing a lot of guesswork. So what we end up doing partially as like a sanity check for this EYS, and also because not everyone trusts the EYS, is measure all sorts of other things like build speed, number of freezes in the IDE, and actually one of my favorites is crashes in the app, because crashes take time to solve. They're distracting. And, in addition to all the ways that they're bad for the product itself, they're bad for developers. And actually that was part of how Meta justified rolling out null safe to the extent that it did, null safety in Java, by counting the number of crashes, looking where they were originating and saying, well, it's driving them down. And in fact, you would drive them down a lot more if you kept going. So that's also how we're justifying things like, migrating to Kotlin.
As you were saying that, I'm imagining in my head the person that goes into the meeting with Mark Zuckerberg and goes, 1 million developer years saved. So I might be outdating myself with that Austin Powers joke. If you haven't seen the movie, it's really funny. Go see it. Then my joke, and then go watch this talk video again, and my joke will make sense. Then you'll laugh then. Okay.
So we do hours saved, so it'd be a billion.
1 billion. Okay, all right. Enough with that joke. Nice segue to the next topic. I was chatting with this one app. I'm not going to publicly shame them. But hey, how do you deal with the velocity of, this massive app? Well, we just don't run any tests locally. That's how we deal with faster local builds, right? And so, right, how do you balance speed, velocity versus quality, right? Is it a quarterly thing? Hey, we'll invest in configuration, cache, then or is this, how do you balance that within your, Jesse, go first.
I disagree with the premise that these things are in tension with each other. I feel like if we are writing lots of tests, that's not costing us time and it's not costing us quality. It's giving us velocity because we can just ruthlessly change shit and not worry that it's going to break stuff. If we're if our application is well tested and it's well tested, we can make lots of changes and there's just so much velocity that comes downstream from that. And so when you're doing your code review and the code is not as well tested as it ought to be, the person who's reviewing it isn't oh, you should write more tests because it's the right thing to do. They're oh, you should write more tests because it hurts me if you don't write more tests, because I'm going to break that code later by accident unless there's tests to protect us from those sorts of things. So we have a culture of writing lots of tests, and it's worked out really well for us. And again, we might just be below the threshold where the additional tests that we write for a new feature just don't feel like they cost us very much. Maybe one other factor is our CI builds are sharded 600 ways. So you do 600 parallel Gradle builds when you send something to CI for 600 different test modules, which is a lot at our scale, but it's not a lot at the scale of these bigger companies. But it means that in 33 minutes, I find out if I've broken the application in any way. And if I want to add more tests, it just increases that number from 600 parallel modules to 601. And we're on that track, and it's working really well for us.
For us, I think developer velocity and quality goes hand in hand in the sense that we have a very robust A/B testing mechanism. It's all built in-house, so developers can run a lot of tests in the real apps, and we're fairly confident that if something was to go wrong, we'll find out really, really quickly, and we can shut that thing off. But yeah, once those flows kind of go full on, or we're happy with those, then we establish test coverage on top of that, so that we don't introduce regression into that. And ours is a mix of unit testing and kind of UI testing, similar to a framework like Maestro. That's how we kind of balance that. But we also need to do some extra stuff around trust and safety and privacy and compliance. So I think when we talk about quality, I think those things come up first than how things look, but more how they're perceived.
For us, I think at a really big company, what you'll often see is you don't have maybe the cultural norms that Jesse was alluding to, or you've scaled past that to some point. And what I've seen in my time there, I've been at Uber a long time and in other big organizations, is that there's kind of a pendulum that's swinging around a little bit. You get these big different focuses for periods of time. And we had for a long time a focus on moving fast and velocity earlier in the company's life cycle. And in the last couple of years, we've pivoted very, very hard into hey, let's still move fast, but let's make sure we're moving fast safely. Not that we weren't necessarily before. It wasn't like a testless culture, but it's gone even further. And so with that comes just a huge variety in investments across the entire stack. Everything from enforcing, with tooling, incremental code coverage on every diff so that someone at least has to raise it up to a certain threshold when they're writing code, to new types of testing, like we're doing AI test runners for our application to discover issues and help with end-to-end tests that you wouldn't otherwise be able to write all the permutations for feature flags. Going as far as, we're currently developing a framework for measuring a code quality score or code health, and that's an aggregate of a ton of different metrics that's platform opinionated, and we can give that to teams in dashboards with their ownership information and their on-calls so that they can set OKRs around improving that, and they have something measurable to drive on. And then going even further, we're currently redoing our engineering competencies to really solidify and make sure we're calling out the type of quality signals like reliability and coverage and customer focus that you kind of expect from that. And all of these aren't to say, hey, we're not doing velocity anymore. All of these are to move fast, right? Like Jesse said, when you're safe, you can move even faster because you're not breaking shit. But it's to help enforce that and get that into place so that when the pendulum does, eventually swing in another place, we have the tooling there, we have the scaffolding in place that will be safe for a long time.
Also similar to Uber here too, I think with the expectation that these two things are aligned in the long term, we're still investing a lot in a lot of static analysis, and to a lesser extent some of the AI stuff as well. But one thing which I think is perhaps a little bit different is in the short term, sometimes you need to get something out fast and you're going to be making some suboptimal decisions, or maybe you weren't able to use the cool new thing that your next door neighbor team was building because it wasn't ready quite in time for you to do all the testing you needed to do. And so there's this culture of code modding or meta programming, writing code that changes other code. And so it makes it possible to realistically say, I will come back later and fix this because you can automate it. And if you don't automate yourself, someone else will come along and automate it for you and then take credit for it. So you should do it yourself. And we've invested a lot actually in making it more accessible to folks. So you don't necessarily have to know what an AST is or love tree traversal, but it's available to you to make good on your promise and clean up your nonsense later.
Thanks for sharing that. It wouldn't be a panel in 2024 without, the big buzzword AI. So let's jump into that. How are you using AI in your infrastructure, Jesse?
I don't know.
Easy. We're going to get some time for Q&A now.
LLM models mostly for code generation, code translation, test generation, things like that. Also a lot on the on-call side. So most teams, feature teams, infra teams, they have their own on-calls. So if you have a problem, you can just buzz a person. But if people are buzzing you about the same problem, I think we want AI to kind of come up with a document this is a question that comes up pretty often. Why don't we improve the documentation and stuff like that? So that's where we're leveraging the LLM models a lot. And then we're also looking into on-device AI capabilities, to improve stuff, but pretty early stage, or I don't think I can comment on that yet.
Yeah.
For us, we have a lot of investments across all parts of the stack. We call it peanut butter problem because you're just kind of spreading it everywhere. It's more of the salt in the pasta as opposed to the pasta itself. It's just helping amplify, other pieces. And so that's everything from the IDE code assistance to code review tooling with bots to code mods. We're generating code, everything from linter fixes to test generation to helping with our Java to Kotlin migration as well by generating the AST processors. We're also doing things like helping with archaeology, surfacing information, research, putting that in spots like Slack or in external vendor tools like SourceGraph, where we can help have information about our repos. We're also doing a lot in the testing. I mentioned we have the AI test runner, so we have that running across. I think it's running 1,000 CD builds a day, and that's running the entire flow, end-to-end flow to complete specific user journeys, like booking a ride in a ton of different cities with a ton of different permutations, and it's able to work around crazy issues that an end-to-end test never would be able to, the Samsung device that it's running on prompts you for a security update, and it's able to dismiss the dialogue and continue, things like that. Also on-device stuff, we're making a pretty heavy investment with fraud detection and a lot of other signals through our various apps with AI as well. So pretty wide investment.
Yeah, similar here. I guess we get twice the bang for our buck as well, because it makes us more productive, and then we're also like effectively guinea pigs for the llama folks. So they get all sorts of data from us and lots of feedback. There are two ways it's used in particular that are favorites of mine. One is this framework called Sapiens, which basically simulates a human going through the apps and just like wreaking havoc, which is great for testing. Because like if you really wanted to know what would happen if you just like scroll to the bottom and then, you know, way up to the top and did like batshit crazy stuff, that is going to do it for you. So it's a great like way of stress testing. And it's a very boring process if you're going to do it yourself. And that has made also a lot of like larger migrations viable, even if you don't have great test coverage for the code that you're modifying. The other, which is my favorite, was they rolled out a like an internal feature called Recap, which would have llama/metamate, as we call it, recap your hat, basically write your self-review for you. And I think they trained it on like a really overconfident intern. It just made everyone sound like amazing, which was like great for people's egos. And it was like a little too great in some cases, but it was really entertaining to read that, you know, take like your personal note stock and be like, wow, built consensus and like outline project objectives, when in fact it was your nonsense notes about like how to turn on an Android phone.
Yes, that's for sure. Last one before we send you to the bar and happy hour. Remote development, not sure, Jesse, if you all are doing it or who's doing it or not. I know Uber folks are invest a lot in that. How's that worked for you? What gains have you gotten? Is it worth investing in there? When should you, at one point, you don't want to maybe do it for, 5 developers, but, where do you draw the line? And if anybody wants to share anything on that.
I can go first. We have a pretty significant investment there, but we don't view it as mutually exclusive with local development. We view it as augmenting that. We just want to give developers the best tools to get their job done. And one of the really powerful things that we've witnessed is that it really enables a lot of context switching, so folks can do more things at once that they might not have done otherwise. So if your project, takes a long time to set up and index in the IDE and pull from the latest main and make sure you pull the latest build caches from the network, that might dissuade them from going and doing a quick fix and putting that up, or in a code review, actually checking out the code review and clicking into it, making sure, it's what they would expect versus just reading it there, or even like doing an upgrade or a migration. A lot of that gets put off. And so we built this entire system that we've talked about publicly a little bit, where you can just provision a new machine that has the full monorepo indexed, ready to go, all the build snapshots there. You get that in a minute or two, and it's ready to go. So people will use many at once. And we have cloud emulators that are GPU accelerated, so they're fast and responsive, and have tools like Flipper built into that, so you can just have that there. And we've seen a lot of really interesting use cases. Recently, one of my colleagues, he needed to do a bunch of data collection from historical gets in our repo, and he found a tool called PSSH, which is it parallelizes SSH connections and commands that it's running, and ended up spinning up 10 or 20 of these at once, and then running a script that would send out to each one of them, run a bunch of builds, check out the hashes, take the results, pull those back, and take what would have been 24 hours plus of building and collecting data, and cut that down into an hour or two. So just a lot of really interesting, creative solutions that people wouldn't have done otherwise.
Are we done? Right at 6. We're going to do some Q&A, but you can find us at the happy hour. We also have a great old booth. Come and get some great old T-shirts. I got to call one thing out, though. Check out this T-shirt. Very good. Thank you, panelists, for sharing, and thank you all for coming to DroidCon, and we hope you learned something new from this session.